Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to create an application load balancer with two different target groups, and we're going to check out how host-based routing works. So let's head over to the console. Back in EC2, we have our 4 running instances. Let's just check these should all be running successfully now. They've come up, the status checks are almost there. So what we want to do is scroll down to target groups, and we're going to create our target groups first. So let's create a target group. And here we get to choose the target type. For this one, it's going to be instances. I'm going to call this target group TG1-ALB. The port is going to be 80 with the protocol of HTTP. We've got our default VPC in this case, and for you, just make sure that whatever VPC you chose, you're using the same VPC for your load balancer as you did for the instances that you launched in your auto-scaling group. We'll leave the protocol as it is, as well as the health check. So the health check is where the load balancer is going to connect to the client. It's going to connect on port 80 HTTP, and it's just going to check the /path. If it gets a response, then that's great. That means a web service must be running, which is why we checked at the end of the last lesson to ensure that our web service is running. And it is. So in that case, it should work. Now we're going to leave any other settings, click on next, and let's add the instances from 1A and 1B, just those two. Include as pending below, and then let's create the target group. Next, we create another target group, same settings, we'll call this one TG2-ALB, and then again we leave all the other settings as they are, click on next. We're going to add in the instances from zone 1C and 1D. Don't forget to include as pending, and then create the target group. So we've now got these two target groups, and each has 2 instances. The target group 1 will have instances from 1A and 1B availability zones, and target group 2 has instances from 1C and 1D. So let's go and create our load balancer. We'll click on create load balancer, and here are the 4 types of load balancer. So as I mentioned, classic is an old school one. It says previous generation. They don't really want you to use it anymore. Gateway is brand new for very specific use cases. So it's when you deploy and manage a fleet of third-party virtual appliances that support Geneve. It's a very new load balancer and not even available in all regions yet. What we want for this particular exercise is the application load balancer. I'm going to call this my ALB. The listener is the front-end listener. So this is where connections are coming in. So we want that to be HTTP and 80. Now, if you had a certificate, you could use HTTPS, and you'll be requested to add a certificate in the next page. HTTP is good for this. Make sure your VPC is correct, and we're going to choose 4 availability zones, 1A, B, C, and D. Now, let's come down, go to security, next again, and for an application load balancer, we need a security group, so it must be allowing the connections we've just configured. Let's now go to routing. We choose an existing target group, and we're going to choose TG1. Now, as you can see, the settings are already filled out because they're part of the group that we created, the target group. So now let's go next. You'll see that the 2 targets should be registered. And let's create that load balancer. And that will take just a few minutes to come up. Now you'll note that it has a DNS name here. So this is the record that we're going to be using to connect directly to the load balancer. And then what we'll do shortly is go into Route 53 and add a Route 53 entry for dctlabs.com that's going to point to this alias. Now, while that's coming up, what I can do in target groups is go and check my target group, look at targets, and we're going to see what happens to the status of these targets. Now, when the target group wasn't added to a load balancer, the status is unused. We've now added it to the load balancer, and we can see that it's moved to an initial state. So the instances must pass a certain number of health checks before they become healthy. So as long as they do, and they pass the threshold number of successful health checks, then they'll change to a healthy state. So that shouldn't take too long. We can now see that we have healthy instances. So once we know they're healthy, let's go back to the load balancer, copy this DNS name, and then go to another browser tab and try and connect to it. So I've put the ALB DNS name into my browser, and we can see it's directed us to the instance in the 1B availability zone. Now if I just refresh my browser, what I should find is we're seeing it cycle. So as I make a new connection, it's distributing them to a different instance and it's cycling through. So that's how it's balancing the load. The next thing I want to do is create an alias in Route 53 so I can connect to this DNS name using dctlabs.com instead. So what I'm going to do is just find Route 53. I'm going to go to hosted zones and my zone is dctlabs.com. Now if you don't have a hosted zone, you won't be able to do this portion of the exercise. Now I'm going to create a record. It's going to be an A record and it's going to be what's called an alias. Now an alias now gives me the option to connect to a specific endpoint. So I'm going to route traffic to an application or classic load balancer. So let's click on that option, choose the region. So in this case, it's US East, North Virginia, and then choose the load balancer. And so it's found that information. And then I'm just going to create this record. Great, so I've got that record. So what I should be able to do now is connect to dctlabs.com and that will take me to my load balancer. So I've opened another browser tab. Let's go to dctlabs.com and that again takes us to the load balancer. So that works great. Now the reason I've done this is because what I want to do now is create another target group and then a host-based routing rule which routes connections to the new target group based on a different host header. So let's come back, and what we need to do is go back to EC2, go to load balancers, choose listeners, and we're going to edit this listener. So let's edit the rules, click on the plus, then insert rule, add condition, host header, and we're going to put members.dctlabs.com and then just replace dctlabs.com with whatever your domain name is for your hosted zone. And let's OK that, click on action, forward to, and we select target group 2. And that's done. So what will happen now is if the host header is members.dctlabs.com, it forwards to target group 2, and if not, it goes to target group 1, which is the default rule. So we click on save, and then we just go back to Route 53 and we need to add another record. So back in Route 53, we only have the record name for dctlabs.com. Now what we need to do is create the record for members.dctlabs.com. So let's put in members, and it's going to be an A record again, and again it's going to be an alias to an application load balancer in US East, North Virginia, and then we choose the load balancer and create record. So that's done. Now let's see what happens. So I'm back in my load balancer and we're connected to dctlabs.com. So what should happen is if we try and refresh our browser, we get cycled between 1A and 1B. So these are the instances in target group 1. Now let's go back up here and put in members.dctlabs.com. And now we're on the instance in US East 1C, and we're cycling between C and D. So now it's using that information in the host header. So if you remember back in this diagram, what's happened here is we've put members dot and our domain is dctlabs.com, and it's used that host-based information, that information in the host header, to decide which target group to send the connection to. Now we're now going to clean up this lesson. You can leave these records in place. Let's go back to EC2 and get rid of our load balancer. So back in EC2, all I'm going to do is make sure we don't end up paying for the load balancer by deleting this load balancer. Now I'm not deleting the targets, and I don't need to delete the target groups. They don't cost any money, and the instances in those target groups are going to be used for the next lesson. In that lesson, we'll use a network load balancer and some new target groups, but you can register instances in multiple target groups at any one time. So you can leave this in place if you want to. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next lesson.